There have always been heroes that blurred the line between roles, and as Blizzard continues to expand the hero roster, the line gets blurrier. At this rate, we'll eventually reach a point where no matter what role you queue for, you'll end up being able to play it like it was any other role, almost as if we've gone back to the open queue days. And not only are new hero releases blurring the line, since Overwatch 2's release, we've gone from only Mercy having a healing passive, to the support role gaining that passive, to now, everyone having a similar passive. Now everyone is technically able to heal themselves without any help, although the healing takes a while to kick in. The roles are becoming more alike over time, and eventually it will be hard to tell the difference between them. On the flip side, this season the DPS role received a new passive that has helped distinguish them more from the other two roles, but it's left the player base with split opinions, and I'm curious to see if the passive lasts. Maybe it's here to stay, but with how often these role passives have changed already, you never know. I give it credit for doing a great job of making the DPS role feel more impactful, but the unfortunate side effect of this new passive is that it's left the support role and its many players with an identity crisis, and it's also left tanks that rely heavily on healing in a tough spot. Supports have always benefited from dealing damage as they heal, but with the addition of this new DPS passive, it has pushed support players away from healing now more than ever. If you keep up with Overwatch across different mediums, there's been a long-running joke that supports are just DPS but better, due to being capable of dealing around the same damage and also heal on top of it. As a support player myself, I can agree that this was true for a few support heroes prior to Season 9. Now though, the joke might need to be revised a bit. Supports are just DPS with a worse passive. But while this new DPS passive has made playing support feel different, I'm not here to complain about it being OP or anything. I actually think it's a good addition to the game. I simply wanted to ask if this is really how supports were envisioned to be played. And what about tanks? What I'm getting at is that it might be time for Blizzard to create a larger distinction between roles and unblur the lines a little. The DPS passive was a good first step. Maybe the healing reduction percentage needs to be toned down a bit, but I'll leave that for the community to debate. Overall, it's done a successful job of distinguishing the role and making it feel more unique. So what if we created passives for the other two roles that better distinguished them? Passives that reward players more for doing their part as the role they selected. What we have currently for tanks is hardly a passive. The knockback reduction might help a bit, but it doesn't feel like a passive that's good enough to be considered a role passive. The other parts of the tank role passive aren't that much better either. I can hardly tell the difference in ult charge when I shoot at tank, plus it works against your own team when they try to heal you. And the increased base health, as they worded it, isn't actually an increase considering role Q is the main game mode. What if we change the ult charge part of their passive to include the tank players themselves receiving extra ult charge from taking damage? This is just a random thought, and it would probably break the game as it is currently, or cause your tanks to feed. But the point is, it would be interesting to see a more impactful passive, and I'm sure there are others that feel the same. As for supports, while we're taking passives from Mercy, why not do it one more time? That way, at least if your healing is reduced, you can still gain some personal benefit from healing your team. Again, this might break the game, especially with AoE heals, but it's only a suggestion to create a better distinction between roles. I don't actually think this would make a great passive, unless some larger balance changes were made, but the current passive is no longer that unique, and I think many players would agree with me that it needs an update along with the tank passive when we compare both of them to the new DPS passive. Overall, I think it would be better if the role passives incentivized players to play their role a certain way, rather than what we currently have. Players like to receive positive feedback when they make great plays, and that just isn't a thing with these current passives, other than the damage one. And we can see the response to this positive feedback in action with how DPS players have reacted to this recent passive change. If we could replicate that feeling of positive feedback onto the other two roles, it would make the game more interesting to play, and players would feel like their plays on their favorite role are making more of a difference. Having a faster healing rate for staying out of trouble, or making your opponents receive less ult charge, don't feel significant enough for the actual tank or support player, and it's hard to tell how much the way you're playing is affecting the outcome of a match, which is what the DPS passive has done well. Whether you dislike this new passive or not, if Blizzard plans to keep it, then making changes to the other two roles can make it feel better. Support players feel like there's too much damage to heal and end up resorting to damage themselves, but if they're doing that, then why pick support over DPS? It's the opposite problem from the previous seasons. Despite many players saying focus on damage on supports, the majority of support players enjoy the healing part of the role, which is why they pick it over DPS in the first place. And if damage is more impactful for that role, the role loses part of its meaning. I know there are heroes in the support role designed specifically around dealing damage, with healing being more of a side feature, but there are also heroes like Mercy and Lifeweaver that primarily aren't doing a ton of damage. There's nothing wrong with being able to do damage, but it being the main focus of the support role means there will always be this back and forth between the damage role and support role on which one is better when they shouldn't be comparable in the first place. That's the whole point in them being labeled as separate roles. When a tank receives 20% reduced healing, plus gets hit with something like Zen's Discord Orb, it feels absolutely awful for the tank player. But if the tank gains some personal benefit through a passive that fits the role well, then maybe despite it feeling awful, they could still get something out of it, and not just feel like a high HP punching bag. and knockback reduction just isn't the thing that will help. So why not do something about this? It's possible to keep the DPS passive as it is, and still make the other two roles fun in their own way. Now the question is, do we want this? Maybe it's better to have the lines blurred. The more unique the roles are, the more pressure it puts on the players of that role to perform better, which could then in turn lead to increased levels of frustration for players on the other roles when they're completely unable to help in some regard. We can already see this happening with players complaining about not getting healed enough by their supports. Another form of frustration this can create for players is when they can't do anything to prevent themselves from getting a 20% healing reduction from the person they're fighting, especially when you're playing a hero that relies heavily on healing for survival. With the healing reduction having no full counter besides disengaging and hoping you don't get hit again, it can feel like you spend more time staring at a wall waiting for the debuff to end than actually trying to go in and make a play. With the lines blurred further, heroes that don't exactly fit into a given role end up fulfilling a different role that could be necessary. They become heroes that bridge the gap when another role is underperforming, relieving pressure from the players of that role without it turning into a blame game, giving you a better chance of winning. Although to achieve this, we'll need a lot more heroes in each role that blur the lines, making it the more difficult balance direction. There are ups and downs to going either way, but as it is right now, we're somewhere in the middle, and without a change to either blur the line further or unblur it, there will always be a huge balance discrepancy where one role just feels better than another, and it will inevitably lead to players quitting if their favorite role is no longer enjoyable to play. I think everyone wants to feel like they have carry potential no matter what role they pick, and with the right passives or right hero releases, maybe that can be achieved. As it stands, there seems to always be one role that dominates each season, and then the complaints start pouring in asking for nerfs. The complaints will no doubt never end, but I don't think it's healthy for the game to have an entire role always be on top, and I believe that can definitely be minimized. If we can reach a point where it's no longer a role being too overtuned, and rather only specific heroes, it could be easier to use counterplay to win, seeing as we all have the ability to switch heroes mid-match, but not switch roles. I wanted to share my thoughts on this topic because there seems to be a lot of different opinions, and I think the two different paths I'm suggesting could be healthier for the game in the long run. The issue is that we're standing at a fork in the road, and Blizzard needs to choose one path and stick to it, because right now the game's design feels like it's going in two different directions at once, and it's causing a huge divide in the player base. DPS and support feel too similar, and if we're going down the unblur path, I really think something should be done to fix this. Back when the health changes were leaked, I thought supports were going to have less health than DPS, but it turns out everyone got a health boost, and after playing with these changes, that's probably for the better. So something else should be done to supports to make them different. Changing supports is a bit tricky though, because without being able to deal enough damage, it would almost be impossible for some supports to defend themselves, and giving them more healing just makes the game unfun for everyone else, which is why I suggest doing something to their passive. Anyway, let me know if anything I said makes sense, or if I have no idea what I'm talking about, and thanks for watching.